But some property owners are coming in and saying, I want to take that note off of my plat that's been on there for years,
We've taken that note off
and I
the plat
want
before.
to let them split it again. There's been a few
Remember?
occasions when we have.
Well,
Well, we
didn't-
took an MRD
We
note
took the
off
MRD plat off.
for
Well, that-
non-residential development on one particular property
God,
on
if we could
Bingham
go
Hill
back in
Road.
time, if I could ever just go back in time one time, that would be it.
So we wanted you to be aware of the history of MLDs and MRDs and understand that the purpose was to allow people to go through a simplified process back in the 80s and 90s to split their land for certain rights based upon 35 acres development. They weren't subject to the full gamut of subdivision regulations. In exchange for that, they would place the balance of their property under restriction until development was approved by the county for a subdivision.
Is there any reason why we would care if somebody split to 35?
Sure. We've got some good examples where you might find a property that was split. Let's use the 35 acre example or the 105 acre example. If I had 105 acres and I created 3 10-acre parcels,
No, you still got, you got 80 acres.
I got 80 acres. Now I come back. So prior to that, all I would ever got was 3 lots. But by coming in and doing that, if I come back and split it again into 2 by 35s, I've grown the number of density units that I could have been able to do.
But who cares?
Well, we do because that's what the subdivision process is supposed to do. And well permits need to be issued and all those other things that you have to prove up adequate water.
Well, the state will issue those.
Yeah. But we don't have adequate roads. We don't have adequate drainage facilities. We don't do none of those studies in those processes. Yep. And then a guy gets 35s, then he comes in and he proposes a subdivision. You get 3 more lots on that and 3 on the other 35s. It creates an undesirable land use pattern in the long run if you go down around County Road 4.
So what's the option? What option does the guy have? He has no other option. He has 80 acres, so what can he do?
He can come in and apply for a subdivision.
But you can't do a straight subdivision. He'd have to do some kind of conservation development.
Yeah, which
So what would he get? How many acres? He'd get 2 lots.
depends on what zone district he's in. If he's in the open zone district, you divide that 80 by 10, you'd get 8 lots.
Or you get 8.
And then you would have to put
But you have to have water.
80% of it into residual land and 20% developable, 2 acre lots. And then you have to acquire water.
Yeah.
But so people are using it as a way to get rid of that note, as a way to circumvent the
Has anybody
process
tried-
of subdivision and to still maintain some ability to get water through the state by a water permit as a well.
Yeah.
And they're avoiding augmentation and they're slowly eating up the groundwater supply as a result of that.
Sure.
It's not a desirable from a planning perspective. It's not the desirable solution. And the process was very clean. That's what we gave you this for. It was very clear that that was the intent back in the day.
The board has done at least a couple of what I would call exemption lots in the last
Sure.
10 years. And they were really kind of weird, special cases. One was a guy remember the guy whose son got like in the car accident and was like needed constant medical care, and he and his family moved back and going to build a separate home on his property and wanted to make it bigger than what we'd allow for an accessory dwelling. So we let him do an exemption. And then I think we've done at least one other one. I can't
We've done them where there have been people that owned hundreds and hundreds of acres that have gone in and split their properties into just all 35s. And then there's an incremental piece left over and nobody paid attention to it. And eventually it's sold to somebody and then it sells to another person, sells to another person. And then 5 people down the line, this guy owns 5 acres that's not legal by virtue that it was not part of everything else.
So
We've allowed them to use the exemption process to make those parcels legal.
Matt,
That's been
why are you bringing this to our attention now?
because we're seeing an uptick in people requesting to have the notes removed from those plats and those restrictions taken off so that they can use 35 acre development to create additional lots.
And do those things come to us?
They will.
They will. And in terms of the update to the master plan, the comp plan, are we addressing this issue to have greater consistency in how we deal with these issues?
No, because they're code issues and they should just be followed.
Yeah, the code's clear, I think, but everything in the code allows you to ask for
On appeal.
an appeal. I mean, pretty
And
much.
so they're
it's-
asking for appeals and,
Okay.
What he's saying is the code's clear. You can't do this, but you can always ask for an appeal to anything.
yes, sir.
You can always ask us to waive your fees. You can ask us to let you
Right.
take notes off plats. We can ask anything.
They're basically asking to be
Letter
the
to Santa
exception
Claus.
to the rule. And
Ho ho ho.
we're concerned about that. We don't, you know, there's hundreds of these out there.
Yeah.
There's hundreds and hundreds of MLDs that we approved over a 20-year period of time. And if all of a sudden everybody was granted relief to that condition of approval, you would just see a boom of a bunch of 35-acre lots. That isn't necessarily desirable because the road patterns and the drainage patterns and the development patterns that are the result of people just splitting into 35s without any consideration for future development creates a poor land use pattern. And I could show you that across the Front Range, how it actually becomes an obstacle to future development.
So that type of development pattern would contribute to sprawl.
Yeah, and there's no road requirements, and
Well, it would actually be less sprawl.
less sprawl,
It's actually less sprawl if you do what he doesn't want you to do.
unless they come in and they start trying to apply for redivision of the 35s, in which case, depending upon how they created the 35s, there may not be a good logical road pattern that was established with that, and it starts to create
Well,
an
They wouldn't-
undesirable subdivision. But
I
you
hate to
guys
tell
get
I
to
hate
make,
to tell you this, but they wouldn't probably want to do this if it wasn't so onerous to try to do subdivision, right? I mean, you understand
Sure.
that, right?
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
Part of the problem is ours.
well, and we wanted you to understand the history so that when these cases roll out in front of you, at least you can make the decision without us having to revisit this conversation in a hearing, but something that you already had some information on. And that was the intent of today.
And there are two or three of these cases that are coming your way in July and beyond, I think, that have various iterations and permutations of them, so that
Be
was
tough,
part of the
'cause once
reason.
We'll make our
If we
recommendation.
collapse
Yeah.
on one, it's going to be tough to justify what's different about each one of them.
We'll
right?
make our
So-
recommendations and then the board
Okay.
gets to evaluate each one of them on their own merits.
When's that coming to us?
July 15th or 8th, or there are a couple on the agenda
back that
there.
day?
And
That's the
one
first day
in
back, right?
August.
Oh, good.
I'm not sure if that's
Yeah.
David's project.
Yeah, I thought there was another one too, so,
Oh,
They're
my,
both
Yeah.
on the same day.
Well, we got our top guy on it.
oh,
Yeah.
sorry. My MLD isn't ready to be scheduled yet. Sorry.
okay, so
Oh.
that'll be in the future.
So we've got him
So-
working. He's not ready, but we've got him working.
So for the July 15th hearing, we'll get that information ahead of time.
Yes.
I'll be sitting on some beach on a Greek island. I think this would be really fun to read this kind of.
Yeah, you'll enjoy
And that I
that.
put in front of you is the actual language from the last set of the codes in the 90s.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, that's great.
So don't go too far away, Matt. We were going to do a quick 5-minute update on Oil and Gas Task Force. Had their first meeting on Thursday last week, and they meet again in July. So we've got some work to do between now and then. But I think the purpose of Thursday's meeting was really to just get them oriented, make them familiar with web pages and resources and how to communicate with us and each other, to let the public know what the resources were. So we do have a web page for the project and an email address that we're asking the public to send information to us and to share with the committee. So I think all in all, it was a good kickoff meeting. It was really just orientation. So our next meeting, July 18th, we'll start to talk more about the various topics that they would like to delve into. And they are doing some homework that they'll send to us this week to go through and prioritize topics that they think would be worthy of a look at the local level for regulating relative to what the state does. And so we've provided them different information from the state and from other local jurisdictions who have regulations and so on. So that's where we are in that process. certainly can answer any questions you may have. Commissioner Kapalis was there, so you may have your own observations.
Well, a question that I have is I positioned myself at the table with the task force members. Number one is that appropriate? Number, related to that is how much should I be asking questions or engaging since I'm technically not on the task force?
Well, that might be something that your fellow commissioners would want to weigh in on. I mean, I think it's really up to you how you'd like to handle that, but
Well, I think you kind of have you will have an impact, right, if you're there. Just like I think you had an impact to that planning commission hearing that you went to last week, right, where the planning commission didn't take action, and so I think people who come to be part of this process, if we're there, if we're involved, if we've inserted ourselves into it, they will try to bypass the process. What I have seen, anyway, is that they will bypass. It is a letter to Santa Claus, right? All of a sudden, you don't have to talk to mom and dad. You don't have to clean your room and be good. Well, I'll just tell Santa what I want, right? And so, what I think happens is if we involve ourselves too early, I think that what you tend to get is stronger, harsher opinions and less willingness to try to find common ground. And so I've done it for 10 years. That's my experience. I don't know. What do you think? You want to say or don't want to say that? But I mean,
Well, my opinion would be when the board appoints a task force to advise them, they have entrusted some authority in that task force
that would be their work. Yeah.
to do their task and to work together to find solutions. And it feels like that's most genuine when the task force is empowered to do that.
Yeah.
When one of the decision makers is inserted into that process, it feels like it takes away from what the board asked the task force to do.
All right. I mean, we can always vote against the recommendations. I mean, that's okay.
If you're looking to be involved to stay informed, we are videoing each one of these sessions, and so you'll be able to go out and watch it on videotape. You just won't be able to engage with the people that are there at the meeting at that moment. And so that's why we chose to video it, is so the people that can't attend could watch, keep track of what's actually being said, because there's going to be some dialogue going on there that's important.
Yeah, and along those lines, I appreciate that. I appreciate the discussion. I think that, number one, when those videos are available, to make it a little bit easier for us, if you could send us the link. I know a lot is asked of you, but that would be helpful to us and might incentivize us to review that link if we're not there. And also in terms of being physically present, I certainly understand what I've just heard. It is a public meeting. One compromise might be that I should just be there if I choose to go as a passive, as a listener. And not necessarily be sitting at the table like I did on this first time. I went to the first one. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of the dynamics and all of that. But there's no question that a lot of the people in the audience were folks who have pretty strong opinions about things, and my presence there was a way for them to connect with me or say, what about this? How come there's so many industry people on the task force? So your points are well taken, and if we could get the links, that would be helpful when they're available, and then I can decide. For example, the next one is July 18th. I did put it in my calendar as a tentative because it turns out that July 18th is the same night as we have one of our town hall meetings in Berthoud that night, I believe. Mm-hmm. So if I were to go, it would only be for the first hour, and if I were to go, it would be in a more passive.
Oh, that's
role.
great.
Yeah, my advice, I'll take it. My advice would be to not go. That's what I would suggest.
And we'll list the dates out there so that you'll know when, and then I'll just include you in on my email list as far as letting you guys know that stuff's out on the web.
And if they develop a list of recommendations, they can send it to they'll send it to the planning commission. They'll send it to us. We can always we can say we can vote for it. We can vote against it. We can send it back to the task force for additional work on areas that we don't like. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we can do.
Absolutely.
Honor. I think. I don't want to say you're not, but to honor the process is really important, I think, and to get a good process, we got to be at the end of it, not at the beginning of it. I think.
Sure.
Seems like. Anyway, that's it.
And the meeting the other night was really an introductory meeting, so I don't think that there was any.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question.
Any fights? Any
I'm
fist
glad you
fights?
asked
Break
that.
out in the parking lot? No.
No,
Okay.
it was fairly civilized.
So we were planning to bring updates to you periodically through the process, and we can do that as much or as little as you'd like. And we also wanted to ask you if you want to, give us any guidance to share with the committee or guardrails or directions, or just leave it more open for them to do their work. So that's obviously your prerogative also, but if there are certain directions that you think would be helpful so we don't spin our wheels too much as a group, certainly we could take that advice from you as well.
Leslie, on that note, one suggestion I would have is maybe at the next work session that we have like this, where you give updates, perhaps you could give a specific update on the CCI meeting that occurred today. You saw that, Commissioner, where CCI was hosting a meeting with Department of Natural Resources and the oil and gas to get some clarity on, what are some areas that the county's
Study,
doing.
yeah. How
So
that
I'd like
goes.
to hear more about the outcome of that meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, Frank and Charlie Johnson went down to that. We were
Yeah.
all three going to attend, but
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the other related item we wanted to give you a heads up on, we did meet with Magpie last week because they need to get from us, apparently now with the new state regulations, local jurisdictions, counties need to take a position on applications that have previously gone through the state process and been granted approvals. And so they will be sending us some more information about, this is their Bunker 8 facility that's, it's not the Kaufman pit that was the one right next to Loveland's boundary, but it is south of that and it's near Loveland. And they will be sending us more information, including the criteria and so on, so that we can bring that to you, so you can decide what version of a position you'd like to take. And you've got some different options that you could look at. You could waive it, you could say yes, you could say no, you could say it's pending, and we'll explain when the time comes what all those things mean.
This isn't the one in Berthoud either. This isn't.
No.
this is
Totally new
south of
Yeah.
402 by
Yeah.
Warburg Farms
Oh.
area.
So they're
Yeah,
going to
Gerard.
send us more information, and when we have that, we'll bring it to you. But we just wanted you to be aware that that's coming.
And the explanation will include the objective review criteria that have been established, at least initially, and also what our options are, like you just articulated, Leslie. Yeah, thanks.
Do you have ability to comment on the siting, specifically on location and
Yeah, we do as the
from a
local
land use
government
perspective, right?
designees there.
Okay.
The state has said any of the permits that were in process prior to April, the adoption of Senate Bill 181, any of those permits are subject to 181. And
Wow.
jurisdictions will have the ability to either waive their rights on those or to make them pending or whatnot. Weld County waived them all.
That's
For
amazing
everything.
though, because is that the only one we've got that's pending?
That's the only
We got
one
a
we've
couple
heard of so far.
The other
That
two got removed or
Well, we have the Wizard Pit over by Wellington. We have the Kaufman Pit.
oh yeah, but is that still
It's still active.
okay?
What about,
And
wasn't
then we
there,
have 2 or 3 pits that are out by Johnstown, almost to the county line.
Oh, that'd be foolish.
But they're all in process at different stages.
Uh-huh.
And we'll explain the other pits.
They'll probably push
as
them
they
all, won't they? I mean, I would.
At
I
some
would think
point, they
would
will.
have to
Over the
before-
next 2 years, they'll
Yeah.
eventually push them all. Because the state, still has to process those applications in a timely manner
Sure.
as they come priorities.
Well, right, but whatever the, well, I guess they're still subject to the current regulation then.
Right.
So maybe it doesn't save them anything.
So that'll be a little bit new for all of us because obviously we haven't done that kind of process before. So we just want you to be aware that that's coming.
Interesting. Okay.
And then just as by way of other updates, you don't have a hearing this afternoon, so
Who knows?
enjoy the free time.
Yay.
A couple other quick updates. So you are aware that we delayed the wireless, Planning Commission opted to delay the hearing and do a work session with the consultant present. So you now have a date on your calendar for a work session in August. And then following that, we'll go back to the Planning Commission September 11th, and then we'll come back to you, the Commission, on October 7th for review and adoption. So that's the new schedule. If there are questions that you have that you'd like the consultant to answer, they'll be available on the 21st. But the purpose really is so that they're going to do a bit more of a peer review of the draft regulations that we've put together and identify if there's some leeway to address some of the public comments that we heard. But they'll also help provide the clarity about our limitations and constraints of federal and state statutory requirements and so on, so that you all have a level of comfort that you feel like we've covered what we need to. And then
Enjoy that level of comfort.
yes.
Okay.
And then they can also look at some of the court cases and things like that that were cited in some of the community comments that we got. So that's really what they'll do on the 21st.
And their analysis will also include analyzing that document that we received about some of the proposed regulations that, folks were suggesting.
They have all that material from the community. There were, probably 5 to 8 main themes that we saw in a lot of those comments. So they're definitely looking at that. They probably won't look at every last detailed comment, but they'll certainly look at the big themes and bundles of comments that we got to determine how we can address those, if anything.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's ahead. And then you heard something last week about a hypothetical fire hydrant case, and Frank did a little bit more research on that and found that the developer is not approachable any longer, is actually deceased in that particular case. And so and there have been some permits issued without fire sprinklers and so on that were required. And so I think we were looking at some options. Bill's actually here if you have some questions. Frank couldn't be here today. I think what we need to do probably before next week is reach out to the property owners who are affected by this and gauge their level of willingness to work on putting in a fire hydrant with their HOA.
So did we ultimately believe that the conditions were they had to sprinkle or put in the fire hydrant, or was it sprinkle and put in the fire hydrant?
It said both in the
says both?
conditions, to
That
my
seems
understanding.
excessive, frankly.
Yeah, and
I mean,
Frank relayed to me that he thought it was either or. It was
Okay.
you
I
either
thought it
need
was
to
both.
sprinkle, and if you don't sprinkle, then you have to do the
so
the
if they've already
hydrant,
built the
but-
houses without sprinklers, then they need to put the hydrant in, right?
Yeah,
And it's
I
only
think
10
I
grand,
think we
right?
were all thinking that the best option probably to move forward is to figure out how to require a hydrant. So we were going to reach out to the property
There's
owners.
4
and-
properties.
Right. So we'll probably come back to you again with some more information and just finalize
Do you have any
this. But
ability?
we just
Do you have any ability to create a district for that or anything like that? Is that too much trouble for 10 grand?
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do they have an HOA or anything that could contribute?
there is an HOA. Yeah.
Okay.
I understand the HOA has the same covenant.
Oh, it does. So they're violating their own covenant.
Yeah.
It'll cost them $2,000 to change the covenants. You might as
Yeah.
well put it towards a hydrant.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense to reach out to all, there's just 4 of them, fortunately, and see if they're aware of the obligation and what their reaction is to it. Split 4 ways, it's maybe more manageable for those folks. And
Yeah.
if I were them, I would want a fire hydrant. I'm sure their insurance companies have asked where's the closest fire hydrant.
Well, yeah.
And if they, aren't, unintentionally indicate that it's closer than it really is, then that can be problems down the road. So there might be some benefit for them to get it resolved.
Is there any kind of, do we have any kind of road cut permit fees or anything like that? I mean, is there anything we would charge? Can we waive any of our associated fees with it or nothing? We don't, is there anything? Probably it's a subdivision road, right?
Yeah.
So it probably didn't have
We could
county,
look into
probably
that,
didn't have
but-
county maintenance or anything anyway, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's right on County Road 16, and my understanding was the water line is on the south side of the road, so or on the north side of the road, so they wouldn't have to do a road cut.
Oh, they wouldn't even have to do that? Okay.
That was my understanding.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll keep you posted, but we just wanted to let you know, we
Right.
had done some research and had narrowed the range of options, and
Okay.
there's probably
See what they
more,
say.
more to come.
Well, we can always talk about it again, right? Nothing's ever done. Nothing's ever done. Okay, great.
That's
Anything
all we
else?
have for you today, so
Super.
enjoy the afternoon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well done. Where's our new community development director?
the people that are in charge right now. So gung ho, let's get you elected.
I am Sheriff Jimmy L. Suter. I was elected in 2000 and took office in 2001. When I became sheriff, our top priority was to try to solve the mystery of our missing 2 girls and the homicide with Kathy and Mr. Freeman. It was an active investigation by OSBI and the Craig County Sheriff's Department, and the majority of the investigation, of course, was done by the OSBI because they have statewide jurisdiction and they have the authority to go out of state or to talk to other agencies, which can also assist us.
It was a different environment after Vaughn left. There was no doubt about that.
Right.
And this is when we begin to get some confidential informants and some jailhouse snitches out of neighboring Ottawa County.
It's one county over, but it's kind of different. Craig County is your rolling prairies, and then we start getting into the rugged terrain of Ottawa County. A lot of people refer to these little shadowy, no-name towns in Ottawa as outlaw lands. It's a bit shady.